Welcome to the Everyone Has a Story podcast. I want you to picture this. I'm in the 7th grade. I am all of about 5'3", 5'4", maybe 80 pounds. But I love baseball and I made the baseball team, but I didn't make the JV team. I actually made the varsity team. So I get to play with guys 2 years older than me who were probably like men compared to me because I was just a little tyke. But the reason the coach wanted me on the baseball team is that I could play a very, very solid second base, but I could also bunt the ball. And the year before, he had a very competitive team, but he could never get the guys from one base to another. So he had this scheme, he had this strategy that I was going to follow the guys that get on base, and I was going to move them along with my bunting ability. So it's the very first game. Everybody on the team was probably 6 foot tall or taller. And here comes me. Everybody thought I was the bat boy. And we're up to bat first. And sure enough, just like the coach planned, the guy got on first base. And so I look over, and coming from Little League, we never had signals. But, in baseball, once you get into school baseball, you get to have signals. And so I was so excited. And sure enough, I look over at the head coach and he gives me the signal to bunt. And boy, was I excited. My heart was pounding. I've got that signal down. So sure enough, the pitcher hadn't even got on the mound, back on the mound yet. And I'm in my stance to bunt. Like I'm not fooling anybody. So about that time, the whole infield comes rushing in. The pitcher hasn't even thrown the ball yet. He finally throws it. And I lay down the bunt that the coach wanted me to. But I should have been thrown out, and probably the guy on first base, my teammate, should have been thrown out first. But the guy from third base got the ball, and he was ready to throw it to second base to get the force out. And he was so excited too. Must have been the first game jitters. He threw it not only over the second baseman's head, but he also threw it over the center fielder's head. So my little bunt that was supposed to move the guy from first base to second base got me all the way to third base. I thought I was the coolest guy in the world. I'm 5'3". I'm with all these guys, and I'm standing on third base. I just got I drove home a run. I couldn't have been more proud. So at the end of the inning, I go back to the bench to get my mitt, and the coach comes up to me and says, "Next time, you might not show that bunt so quickly." So anyway, as kids, we all have those stories. And we all have signals that we are now prone to in our adult lives. And so I'm not going to take it away from the fun of my 7th grade adventures there on the baseball team, but I am going to talk about something serious today, about the signals that we see in front of us every day, but we don't know how to read them. And I'm talking more primarily with the workplace. We've heard from time to time how toxic workplace environment is, how toxic our bosses are, how bad a coworker we have. But sometimes the reason those things are even happening is because there's signals that are not being seen or understood or just lost in the play of the game. And so today, that's what my guest and I are going to talk about. So let me introduce Jenny Aguilar-Drennan. How are you? And thank you for being a guest.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for that wonderful story you started with.
Oh, you're very welcome. And so Jenny is the founder and director of We Thrive Learning. And you're probably going to think at first, okay, what does We Thrive Learning really have to do with business? But when you start to really hear our conversation, you're going to fully have a better understanding of really what could be happening in your workplace, maybe even with you or maybe your boss, that needs to be addressed, I would say, sooner than later, but at least recognized and understood. So that way people don't walk away from conversations or disappointments and shaking their head saying that person's a loser and never wanting to deal with that person ever again. And so that's what we're going to talk about. But before we get going, Jenny, I've done a quick introduction. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Sure, I'd love to. I'm an educational therapist, formerly a teacher, and a student coach is what I call myself. We call ourselves learning coaches. And what that means is we specialize in supporting students, right? Students with diverse learning differences. Our practices really focuses and specializes in supporting students with ADHD. And with that, oftentimes comes math support, written expression, and processing issues that we also teach students strategies to alleviate and help make learning easier for them.
Well, I can't thank you enough because, I've had plenty of conversations on my podcast here with other people who we talk about, really fixing the problem of the workplace environment. And, there's a million different theories and possibilities and opportunities to correct things. But, the one thing I'm really excited about today is that we're going to talk about maybe what could be a root of the problem for some people. And that's important because, it's one thing to make the plant look a little bit better, make it a little bit healthier, but really, if you don't get to the root, it's just going to continue to happen from time to time, and sometimes in very tragic ways. So anyway, thank you again for being here. And so let's get started. So you've talked about, your business and who your students are. So why don't you kind of give us a better idea of who those students really are and what are they dealing with?
Yeah, so students, they come in, they've been either diagnosed or we're suspecting there is a diagnosis for ADHD. And so what that really means is they have an overabundance of attention, right? It's called attention deficit disorder, but there is no deficit in the attention here. They have an overabundance of it and they have a difficult time managing it. And so with that impacts every part of their life in and out of school. So we support the academics 100%, but we look at the whole person, right? The whole child here. So how else is the ADHD manifesting in their day-to-day lives? What does that look like with their relationships with their parents or their teachers or their peers? What's their sleep habits like and their sleep hygiene? What's their narrative like? So ultimately, we look at everything because we need to figure out how is this child branding themselves and how is that coming way of them thriving? How's that coming in their way?
So let's go now a little bit deeper there. You've now assessed what's going on. You've got a good idea of what this individual is going through. So now take it from there. What does your company do for that individual? Because it goes deeper than just the individual.
Correct. So they can come in and they say the student struggles with motivation. Well, there are so many things involved with motivation, right? So once we start asking this child question, we engage them. We have to lower their stress first, right? Make them feel comfortable, hear them out. Prior to that, actually, we ask families for reports and assessments or everything. If they don't have that, right, we still have the conversation with the family to get a overall picture of the student's background. So what's their learning history look like, their educational journey, everything that, we just want to get to know who this child is from the parent's perspective and the teacher's perspective. From there, we then talk to the student, right? So if they come in, they're saying, I just don't care about school. I don't believe that. Every child cares. Everybody wants to do well, right? It's a human instinct to want to do well. It's not that you don't care. What else? So now we need to figure out what is coming in the way of this child expressing themselves in this way, right? So then that's when we start asking open-ended questions. And then we can start teasing through to see, okay, what is really coming in the way of this child's motivation? There's so many things. Motivation is really complex. There's so many factors that could impact it. And so we start by taking aim in one way, perhaps. And through our work together, we may discover that we've taken aim in the wrong direction. And so then we need to pivot or we need to tweak the strategy and try something else. All again, with the student's full autonomy. So the student here has got choice in everything. The student here is co-creating the goals with us, and then we're building data. So we're tracking their goals, we're measuring progress, we're looking at patterns so we can get the data. Now, once we have the data, then we can begin to figure out, okay, where do we go from here? What can we do better? Or do we need to come back and tweak it? Or do we need to pivot in a whole different direction?
So Why does any of this matter? You know, I mean, I think we all know, but instead of us trying to assume, why does something like this, especially now at the in the younger age as children, not as adults, why does this really matter today?
Okay, so they're building, right? They're sculpting their brain into the brain that they're going to carry into their adulthood. Okay, so we, especially in those adolescence years, the brain is really pruning. And so that's, there we can, it's very plastic at that time, and we can come in and sculpt it in the quote unquote better way to lower that stress. When students and people do not seek the support or don't even know that they may have a diagnosis of ADHD, right? What happens is they begin to label themselves. They begin to brand themselves as I'm stupid, I'm lazy, I'm dumb, I can't do this work. They do not understand the person that they are, right? They have no self-awareness. And so they don't even know how do I even begin to manage myself without awareness, without the the words to really like clarify, right? What are my struggles? What am I good at? What's easy for me and why? Why is this a trigger and why is this not? They don't know how to manage themselves. We all need awareness to know how to manage ourselves, because that's going to develop the metacognition, right? That we're going to think about how we're thinking. That's going to allow us to take a bird's eye view of everything and see, okay, where do I want to go from here? Now that I have clarity on this issue, where do I want to go?
So you mentioned labeling. There are so many theories out there about why we label and who should we label and everything else. But let's step one phase earlier. So myself, if something's going on, or my family and something's going on, what signs can we see that before we start to put a label on what I'm doing, who I am, and typically in a negative way, what signs can we see and experience to say, okay, this is what's happening with this person and we need to get help now?
There are so many signs that can point to perhaps seeking an evaluation, right? One, I would say, is they losing track of time. So being pretty time blind. So either a minute feels like forever because it's a really mundane task. And so you put it off, right? Even if it takes a minute, or 2 hours can feel like 20 minutes because you've enjoyed doing that task so much. You're so engaged with it, right? So that's what I like to say, they're specialists. People with ADHD are specialists. They naturally gravitate towards certain things and they hyper focus, and that's what they're passionate about. So if you can imagine a work, right, where that's not their passion, everything is going to be exponentially harder for them to complete. If they have no interest in it, it's not tied to their values, it's going to be really hard for them to complete. The other one I'd say is scattered, right? So they think very curvilinear. There is no sequence of how they do things, and they activate just based off of what comes to mind first, without any forethought or planning to it, right? They just go as the spur of the moment, instantaneously, which sometimes can be really good because that's where we see all this creativity of juice flowing, right? And other times it can be really challenging because they could have eliminated a lot of frustration and stress that, hiccups that they hit later on because of their lack of planning. Same thing with quote unquote procrastination. I hate to say that, but I don't believe in procrastination. They thrive off of stress. So they leave things till the very last minute. And that's when they hit them, right? That's what activates them to go. The other one's emotional regulation, because they've constantly felt like they're not meeting other people's expectations. And this, as an adult, this has been ingrained into them from their childhood. The no's that they hear from the outside world plus the no's that they tell themselves, just like the person they develop into is just they have a very, very negative narrative. And so anything can trigger them, very sensitive to others.
You mentioned earlier that sometimes they can get into that that mode to where they're 20 minutes and they're just really into it. You called it the juice was flowing. Is that another term for being in the flow?
Yes, exactly.
And how does that differentiate between this individual and someone that does not have this ADHD?
You can be in a state of flow, right? And when you're in a state of flow, it's when this part of the brain's really forming. And the difference is for someone with ADHD to get into that state, it's got to be something that they're super passionate about, something that's a high interest to them. Or quote unquote, the neurotypical person, it's you can force yourself into a state of flow by just starting. 10 minutes later, you find yourself, you're really concentrated.
There's the old saying that instead of criticizing the clown, why do you even keep going to that circus? And there's times I remember back when I was in school and some of my first jobs, there were always those one or two, sometimes a little bit more individuals who never seemed to fit in. They just never really, connected with the class, the teacher, whatever the subject was. And so I'm assuming just as a defense mechanism, they would clown around, keep themselves busy and clown around to avoid more embarrassment of being what they thought was labeled dumb. But then there was times where they would get into an activity. And all of a sudden, I remember looking back thinking, wow, this guy, this girl is quiet. Things are going, and I look around and their head is down and they are ripping away at whatever that is. So is that what you're referring to?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm referring to. Yes, that's when, they unleash, really. You give them a problem, they can solve it. Right. It's not that it may very well could have been that they're bored. And so they need some stimulation to keep them engaged. And if it's not given to them, they'll create it by being funny or inappropriate.
Yeah. All right. So now we've kind of identified the people here that we're talking about. So let's go to the workplace environment, the business community. And right now, unfortunately, especially with the effects of COVID and some key employees not coming back because they didn't feel, wanted, or they didn't feel like they were appreciated at their job. And so businesses have had to promote from within, hire under fire, and they bring people into management roles, leadership roles that really, they don't have interest in it. They don't have the skill set in it, but they took on the role because they're a good, dutiful employee and they want to help the company out wherever possible. So now they're leading the team. And all of a sudden now you've got this, what I'm going to call the clown, because, they're not really excited about doing the job that they want. So now you've got a boss, a manager who doesn't really understand exactly what you deal with. And so all of a sudden now this labeling starts happening because he or she is thinking, I can't get my job done. I can't do what I'm supposed to do for this company if I've got a clown working for me, if I got someone who doesn't want to be here, all this kind of stuff. They look bored. They're just, off in their own little zone. So tell us about how this applies to not the school classroom anymore, but really the workplace environment.
Yeah. So are we referring to the person who was just promoted?
Both.
The
Both.
person that they're leading?
Yep.
So I would say with the person promoted, there's a lot that can go on there, right? Because I see this in students even, you can come in and if I give you a formula or I tell you how to do something, there's no problem that you will go and execute it, right? Same thing with a leader, a boss, I'm assuming. Like if a boss is always told what to do, they could be an excellent worker because they follow whatever they were supposed to. However, if they get to a position where now they need to do a lot more critical thinking and problem solving, just because they were able to do X, Y, and Z in their previous role does not mean that they'll be able to problem solve and critical think critically in the way that this new role requires, right? So that's two different types of thinking there. A person with ADHD is much more likely to thrive in a role where they need to solve the problems and they're critically thinking. So that's like, I do notice that. The other part is if they're managing someone, if someone, a quote unquote neurotypical person is managing someone who may or may not look scattered, because they perceive them as an adult who is in a analyst position or a manager position, you expect that person to come in with the skills necessary to carry out the job that they're supposed to be performing, right? However, they might have a brilliant, they might think very critically, but they might really struggle with all the tasks that it takes to deliver that, task. So, for example, if they're working on a project, the emailing involved, the pre-planning involved, the getting the team together, coordinating, having a positive, engaging conversation with the team. There are so many skills that are needed to deliver the project, not just, plan it or create it, right? And so they might be the perfect fit to put that visual together and think in a way that no one else would in that room for that project. But when it comes to all the other types of tasks that are required, that's where they may struggle.
All right. And so we've now outlined who might be better for certain roles and responsibilities at workplace. So let's say we do get the ideal person in that place, but we know that they do have issues with this ADHD, and that we know that some things are going to thrive on and other things that they are really going to find even more challenging than the ordinary person would. What are going to be the real results that this organization can see, and what kind of potential challenges that they need to address accordingly ahead of time, proactively, to make this a more workplace friendly environment?
Yeah, I think there's no easy answer to that, like no quick fix. And I think this could take years for society to really evolve because there still is a lot of stigma tied to having a diagnosis. People aren't as forthcoming in sharing with their leaders, if they know they have a diagnosis. So I think the company's culture needs to be fully embracing and invite its colleagues, its team members to share any diagnosis that they would feel comfortable sharing, and to put it into terms as to that, it's important for us to know so that we can support you. However, just knowing that someone has a diagnosis does not mean that that company is going to know how to support them. So they need to also know about that diagnosis, because if without someone knowing about ADHD or any diagnosis, you can further oppress and damage someone, right? Because you're not going to have a full understanding. So your lack of understanding, you're going to not your perspective of everything is going to be different. The way you approach things, the questions that you ask is going to be very different. So ultimately, what a company, in the perfect world, would want to do is have coaches, right? Either executive coaches, ADHD coaches, etc. However, that's pricey. But it would be interesting to see what difference does it make to the company, right? To hire coaches here, and then how does that impact the company after that? Yes, it's pricey to hire a coach, but it's much more pricey to deal with the effects of not hiring a coach, because what ends up happening is people leave. People don't feel like they're succeeding in their role. They're not motivated anymore, and there's a lot of conflict between teams.
So if I'm hearing you right, though, the first thing a company needs to do is recognize these signs, and then look outside their normal realm of resources to really find the right fix or the right, at least, help and assistance for these people. Because from a business owner standpoint that I sit in, I do know that sometimes if I have one person who is struggling, for whatever reason, I'm not the expert, I'm not the coach here, but we all have employees who struggle. That can bring down the rest of the team. That can bring down just ill feelings to where now there are more than one person who's not producing at the rate they should, because everything is now in disarray. So if anything else, I'm asking from a business owner standpoint, at least having the team aware of what's going on, and that it's not this guy or this gal just being a class clown or whatever, but really are having some issues that need all of our support. If anything else, just a pat on the back, but then let that owner take the next step to say, okay, this person is really worth his weight to me, her weight to me. I do need to find some extra help for this person. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah. And I also think that's really delicate, right? To share with, so something that maybe someone considers really private. So, there's so many layers to this, but again, that person needs to feel comfortable in openly sharing this with their boss, and then saying, yes, it's okay for you to share this with my team. And yes, I would like the coach, because we can't assume that they're going to want a coach. It takes a lot of courage to accept help.
Yeah. And really, when it starts to step out of your boundaries of areas of expertise, make sure you do everything right, legally and morally responsibly. Don't jump in because you heard this great episode with Roger and Jenny and say, okay, I'm going to now go find a coach, and then all of a sudden I find myself in the wrong end of a legal suit because I made public something that really wasn't meant to be public yet on behalf of that person.
Yeah. Or if you're all with good intentions, you go out, you find a coach, you hire them, and the person doesn't want a coach. They're not seeing it yet. Yeah. The value of it.
Yeah. So tread carefully and lightly until everything is out in the open to where everybody feels on the same team and aligned, correct?
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well, Jenny, I can't thank you enough for being my guest today. And I know this is a very delicate and sensitive topic, but leave us with a little bit of positive inspiration that can help us move forward with either ourselves, our coworkers, or whoever in our lives.
Yeah, recently I actually heard it on another podcast called Impact Parents, and I can't remember who said it, but that's something that I've been thinking. It's a mantra that I have, and the mantra is, there are no problems because there's always a solution. And I just love that because it provides a really optimistic, it's really positive, and allow it, to me at least, it keeps me grounded. But if any of your listeners want to connect more and have any questions, I'd be happy to chat with them as well.
And thank you for that final words of encouragement. But if they do want to reach out and connect with you, how can they get a hold of you?
They can email me at Jenny@WeThriveLearning, or they can book a call at WeThriveLearning.com.
Perfect. Well, Jenny, thank you very much. And thank you for what you're doing, because I don't know the numbers out there in the workplace, but there's a bunch of them out there that probably have these issues that have been just accepted and labeled, as opposed to really, getting to the crux of why they're dealing with life the way they are. And it's important for us to all to get out there and support each other.
Absolutely. The one thing, Roger, I just want to share with as well is, if they have a child that has been diagnosed with ADHD, there's a 50% likelihood that one of the parents does. And so that's just something to keep in mind, because it's ADHD is much more prevalent in children. They've been diagnosed more. That does not mean they have it more. They've just been diagnosed more. And so, if any of your listeners suspect that they have it, the best thing they can do is get an evaluation. And if it's not roll it out.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. And I can only imagine who's out there listening right now who probably knows someone, because as soon as I met you and we started having conversations, a bunch of names, a bunch of faces popped up on people who I might consider having these issues that we're discussing and probably went undiagnosed because now they're in their adult life that wasn't even, these thoughts were not even prevalent back when they were children. And now all of a sudden they have children experiencing the same things and, doing the same things.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a joy. Thank you.
My podcast wouldn't be the same if it wasn't for my sponsors and my great supporters. So let me take this opportunity to thank each and every one of them. First of all, I want to thank Rebecca at Custom Bookkeeping and Accounting, delivering trustworthy bookkeeping services since 2003. Dave and Dara at Virtues Matter, making this world a much happier place to be with their Virtues card apps, coaching, and workshops. Stephen at Buller Accounting, giving business owners depth and insight to their numbers. Eric and his team at Ivy Cat Web Design, the real superheroes of web development and design. Jennifer and Jean at the Seavers Real Estate Team, serving Pierce and Kitsap counties with their home buying and selling needs. Maury at the Maury Method, the world's only brainwave entrainment engineer, helping everyone have more clarity, less stress, and overall better brain health. Priya at Pivot My Profit, helping individuals and businesses have better control of their finances and more money at the end of their day. Melissa at the Soul Vibe Energy High, the queen of the aha moments, helping individuals find those holes in their cups, repair the hole, and gain back their positive energy. And finally, Rick at West Sound Recording. You talk, they do all the rest. Thank you, Rick, for all your efforts with the production and editing of my podcast.